Welcome to the Math Ed Podcast. My name is Sam Otten from the University of Missouri, and my guest is Pamela Weber Harris, who is a professional developer and an accomplished author. And Pam, I'm so glad to have you here to talk about some of your work.
Sam, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
We're going to be talking about a recent book that Pam has released through Corwin Press, and there's actually some follow-up books that I think we might get a little bit of a tease about as well. The book right now, though, is called Developing Mathematical Reasoning: Avoiding the Trap of Algorithms, and it's a grade K-12 book, which is really cool. But before we get into some of the details of that book, Pam, let's back up a little bit, and let me just ask you, what are some of the things we should know about you and your educational background as we get to know you a little bit as an author?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm going to just mention a few highlights. I went to BYU as an undergrad, then I taught high school. When I started teaching high school, I had a wonderful experience with my cooperating teacher and both then the gentleman who hired me for my first high school position. They were both heavily invested and interested in the just then emerging graphing calculators. I had all of a sudden, a different view of what mathematics could be. Not even mathematics teaching, but like the doing of mathematics changed for me because I could type stuff in and see what happened. And I could all of a sudden begin to play with more than just, did I get the answer in the back of the book? But I could play with functions and transformations, and all of that was brand new as a beginning teacher. So that was very noteworthy. Also, as a third-year teacher, I ran into Gail Burrell at an NCTM, and it was before she was the NCTM president, just before, and she has been a huge influence on me over time. My husband took me to Michigan for grad school for him, and then we went to Texas, and I started grad school at Texas State. While I was getting my master's, I had the opportunity to work with a statewide systemic initiative with the Dana Center at the University of Texas at Austin. And we were working on a brand new course that Texas had just designed for high schools called mathematical modeling. And I got the opportunity to work with mathematicians who informed us about mathematical modeling and then kind of translate their mathematics into a usable form for high school teachers and for this brand new course. There were no materials out yet. And so we were doing this professional development workshop for teachers to help them teach this course. And I got an opportunity to rub shoulders with some amazing mathematicians and learn about mathematical modeling kind of from a high level. That then allowed me to work with the Dana Center quite a bit. That hugely influenced where I went from there. I took a bit of a break from full-time teaching and had 4 kids. That was extremely important to me personally, but also professionally, because as a high school teacher, as I saw them grow, especially my oldest, he started doing things. The mental actions he was using to solve problems were not the mental actions I was using or my high school students were using. For the most part, they were rote memorizing and mimicking. And my own personal kid was using relationships and connections and logicking his way through problems. And that was I don't know, there was something about the fact that I birthed this kid, like he came from me, that it gave me kind of the guts to go, wait, what? What are you doing? Like I had heard people do, I'm quoting in the air quotes, mental math before.
Mm-hmm.
And I had just always waved it off a little bit and said, I got a pencil and paper, give me a calculator, I can do that. But I didn't really know what people were doing when they did quote unquote mental math or when they didn't use a traditional algorithm.
Mm.
I didn't know what they were doing. I just assumed they were doing the algorithm in their head, like little ones and cross the outies or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So my experience as a mathematics student was far different than his, even though we had the same teaching. I think that's noteworthy. Like he didn't have newfangled teaching. He had the same old, same old. But I began to notice that the mental actions he was using were fundamentally different than the ones I thought it meant to use when you mathed. If I were to describe them now, I couldn't have then, but to describe them now, I was rote memorizing and mimicking. And Sam, I got to tell you, I'm aware that listeners to this podcast, this is you do a great job on this podcast, but knowing the people you usually interview and the topics you usually cover, I'm aware that your audiences might be potentially sort of looking down on me right now. You might be like, oh yeah, we get grad students like you think you're good at math, and actually you just rote, memorize, and mimic stuff. And I'm gonna suggest, yeah, we kind of did what we were told to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like we were sort of sold the idea that to do math, you repeated what the teacher gave you. As long as you got a correct answer, then when the teacher said, show your work, really, I think all of my teachers meant show me my work. They didn't mean show me your work. They weren't interested in what my brain was doing. They
Mm-hmm.
wanted me to mimic what they were doing. I did that. I did that well. I got really good grades. I went on. I didn't really hit my wall until linear and then abstract algebra. When all of a sudden they wouldn't give me the proofs to memorize. And it was a whole new experience. And I didn't know how to fix that cognitive dissonance of saying, wait, I have been good at what I thought was mathematics. And now you're telling me that's this other thing. And somehow the fact that he was my kid gave me the courage or the intellectual fortitude to say, what is this? And could we create what he's doing in me or in my high school students? Like, could we create it intentionally? So as a high school math teacher, I dove into as much research as I could get my hands on. Ironically, at the same time, the NSF funded curricula were just coming out. And
Mm.
so I was looking at things like investigations in data, number, and space and what Turk was doing. And I was looking at everyday math and what Usiskin was proposing. CMP was coming out. And there were some nice high school things too, though I didn't really look at those because I was more interested in what my kids were doing at that point. So my young son came home one day and I was really chewing on, Joe Bowler had just said, don't give time fact math tests anymore. It gives kids math anxiety. But, like we need kids to know their facts. I was clear on that, but I also don't want to give kids math anxiety. So sort of chewing on that. He came home and I was like, I'm kind of curious. You're in fourth, fifth grade. I look at him and I said, do you know your multiplication facts? What I really asked him was, do you know your fives? I'll never forget. He looked me straight in the eye and he said, no. I was like panicked. I'm a math teacher, mom, panicking right there. And he could kind of tell I was panicking. He's like, mom, you don't have to know your fives if you know your tens. I'm pausing because in that moment I paused and I said, what? And he said, you don't have to know your fives if you know your tens. I said, dude, I heard what you said. I don't know what you mean. Now, again, you might have people listening right now that are like, really, really? No, really. In that moment, I'd never considered the fact that to multiply by five, I literally had to say to him, give me an example. And he said, okay, say you don't know nine times five. Well, nine times 10 is 90, and five is half of 10, so half of 90 is 45. To which I said, good heavens, that is nine times five. Does that work all the time? Now I'm bringing some of the mathematical behavior that I had. Can we generalize this? Is this something that we could, use? So I just shot back at him, give me another example. And he said, now I know that's not general, that's inductive reasoning, but give me one more.
Yeah.
His response, Sam, like blew my mind because he said, well, okay, how about five times 23? Not the example I'm thinking of. Like in that moment, I'm fussing. Do kids know their single digit facts and what does it mean to, time tests and math anxiety?
You're thinking about the specific sheet of paper that's like 10 by 10, just those ones. And he's going way
Exactly that.
beyond that. He's going up to the 20s. And
He's found a relationship that he can find five times anything. And really, then you can kind of create a proof without words. If you have an area model that is a 10 by something and you cut it in half, you clearly have a five by something. If you have
Mhm.
10 groups of things and you cut it in half, you have five groups of things. Like
Mhm.
we can generalize that. And I got so interested. What are the mental actions that mathy people actually use? If they actually use relationships like that, what have I been missing out on? And it's been an exciting journey to dive into everything I could kind of get my hands on. Realistic
Mhm.
mathematics education was a huge influence. Kathy Fosno and her Young Mathematicians at Work might have been maybe the biggest influence into numeracy for me, because then I looked at kind of everything else through that lens. And because of that, then when I did finally finish my master's, which I finally did at Texas State, then I went on and I was able to adjunct at the University of Texas and teach math methods and continue sort of my own personal research with there. And then also I moved a little closer to home at Texas State and adjunct there. So those are sort of the main influence I would say that really have kind of propelled me forward.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear your own math experience, then your teaching experience, but then your children, and then seeing that and how all of those kind of came together to provide different dimensions. And then also the scholarly community that you're getting involved in, seeing the curriculum that's coming out, the people that are working on it. So it's your story there kind of has this confluence of a lot of different levels of perspectives on math ed all coming together.
Yeah, and in a really nice way, I'll give Janie Sheilak at Texas A&M, retired recently, early in my career, when I was so heavily involved in graphing calculators, I was doing some work with TI, and she was one of the workshops, and her influence was, what could we do with younger students with calculators? And I said to her, I'm kind of really interested in this younger thing, and she knew me as a secondary at that time, I was doing a lot of PD with teachers with graphing calculators. And she said, "Oh, go K-12. Like so many people like have these niches, these smaller niches, and it's more rare for anybody to really have that K-12 vision." That was super good advice for me because I think that's one of the unique things that I bring to math ed is helping teachers really think about long term. What are the kinds of frameworks that we can use but we can get kindergarten teachers talking to calculus teachers and have a productive pedagogy conversation and math actually.
Yeah. And we're going to get into some of that in the book because the Developing Mathematical Reasoning book, I can tell that you're trying to lay out some ways of talking and some graphics of how to think that go K-12, and that does seem like very helpful for people to have that language and that terminology. But before we get there, I do want to pick up one more thing before the book. You mentioned the way that you kind of got really passionate and excited about thinking about math in new ways, and that leads to, I think, one of your, catchphrases is that math is figure outable. And then you also mentioned the numeracy, and I know you've written on numeracy before. So, do you want to just maybe comment on some of that work you've done around numeracy?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned Kathy Fosno and her Young Mathematicians at Work. As I was doing professional development for high school teachers, a lot in the state of Texas, but kind of all around with Texas Instruments with graphing calculators, I was myself developing numeracy. And so during breaks, I would say to these high school teachers, did you know you can think about subtraction? Well, again, your listeners might be like, of course you can. But I invite you to consider probably 75% of the teachers that I work with have never.
And that's teacher. Yeah, I was just about to say, like, your experience, I think, is speaking from the majority of people that have gone through school math, and yeah, vast majority probably.
Yeah. And so they would look at me and say, we'd go to a workshop on this. And so I started literally doing building powerful numeracy for middle and high school student workshops. And Heinemann approached me. I wrote the book, and then I wrote a companion book, activities, lessons and activities for building powerful numeracy. And that was a great run for about 10 years or so. I just did workshops all around the country about how we can really use numeracy into the content that we teach in middle and high school. If we can get kids to actually think a little bit about numbers, they can then dive into what we're trying to get them to teach at grade level content with not only more confidence, but actually with more mathing, more sort of mathematical disposition, and therefore have more success in those higher math subjects. After I'd done a lot of that work with just numeracy, I turned my attention back to secondary math. The state of Texas came to me and said, "Hey, they had a thing called text teams. It was brilliant, really nice professional development setup. I got to work with teachers long term over several years, training teachers across the state. And one of the things that we did was create high school workshops. So I created an Algebra 1 and then an Algebra 2 pre-cal workshop. We worked on how can we really help teachers bring the best of technology as a tool into that. And so because of that, I also helped write Discovering Advanced Algebra for Key Curriculum Press and it turned into Kendall Hunt. So that was an amazing experience. And along with that, we wrote algebra problem strings and advanced algebra problem strings. That's really where I took the numeracy work with problem strings. That's an instructional routine. And I took that maybe for the first time into the secondary realm, that it wasn't numbers anymore. It was actually strings of problems with graphs and functions and equations and like high school content or middle and high school content, where the strings actually were helping build that grade level content, not numeracy into the grade level content, but literally that grade level content. So that was pretty amazing. And then around the same time, I got the opportunity to work with the Math Learning Center, and I helped write Bridges in Mathematics version 2, grades 3, 4, and 5. And so that was an amazing opportunity to really work with some really cool people. Alan Fisher at the Math Learning Center is a very thoughtful educator, and that was amazing. So notice that I was working, sort of younger grades at the same time that I was working at the higher grades. And so it really gave me, I think, a bit of a unique opportunity to kind of create frameworks and structures around like what does mathematics teaching look like, kind of at this broader, wider scale. And most recently, I just worked with Hand to Mind, and we created 4 kits that are to build the foundations for strategies. I'm particularly proud of part of that work because I feel like what we did was take a lot of what's been said in research about what are the little things that kids need to be able to pull together for them to actually have numeracy or be using the mathematical behaviors of a mathematician. But we identified them and created tasks for teachers to do with students instead of just saying, that kid's kind of got it. Oh, those kids don't. Okay, we better tier 2, tier 3 them. Well, what if we actually had tier 1 instruction that would helped all kids build those that maybe lesser known? I think a lot of researchers know what those are, but they don't always translate well in curricular materials. I think curricular materials often say, get some conceptual understanding, and then kids will do the algorithm better. And I take a different stance. It's not just about some conceptual understanding so they can then know when to do the algorithms and do them better, but I'm actually going to push hard against the algorithms being our end goal at all.
Yeah, and that comes through in the book. Like you have some algorithms where you take them apart and you sort of like, let's look at these in details and let's talk about what might be a little bit problematic about these. It's not that you're like opposed to the algorithms existing. But it's like you just said here, it's about like they should not be the culmination of the learning experiences that people are having in math class.
Yeah, because if it is the goal, if the goal is to rote memorize and mimic algorithms, then we get students stuck there. Now, almost all of your listeners are going to say, well, of course the goal isn't to rote memorize and mimic, but that's the way it's translated
Yeah.
to many, if not most, educators, especially younger grades. They hear, oh, okay, it's better to get some conceptual understanding, but our end goal is for kids to just do these steps,
Yeah.
circle their answer at the end, mimic those steps, and then we've accomplished that they're doing mathematical work.
Yeah.
That's the way it gets translated. So I'm inviting us all to consider, what if we took that end goal out? Like, first of all, the book is going to walk into what are all those traps
Hmm.
and what really is our goal, and how can we achieve that goal, rather than inadvertently getting kids trapped, getting teachers and kids trapped.
Yeah, and so that is the book from Corwin Press, Developing Mathematical Reasoning, Avoiding the Trap of Algorithms. So yeah, what led to this book? So you've maybe alluded to some things from your story, but specifically, what was kind of the origin of this book?
In a big way, it was all of the work that I had been doing for the past 30 years of really looking at both, the expertise that I developed at teaching high school math, and then heading back into the younger grades and really thinking about, what does it mean? What are the foundations that we need to build so that kids can have strategies where our teachers and kids sort of getting trapped. And over the years, I developed a graphic that I call the development of mathematical reasoning, that kind of outlays what are the domains of reasoning that we really want to help kids develop so that they're reasoning at new and more in new and more sophisticated ways. What are those? Because one of the biggest traps of the algorithms is that kids can perform the steps of an algorithm and get correct answers, but actually using less sophisticated reasoning than the problems were intended to develop and use. Knowing that that trap was there, and pulling everything from K-12 together, I created this graphic that moves. It's a series of concentric ovals, and the smallest oval is counting strategies. That's kind of where we begin with kids. They need to learn how to count and then use strategies to solve problems. But we don't want to leave kids there. We need to help them think more sophisticatedly. And that's the oval that then contains that is additive reasoning. And the oval that then contains that, we need to move then to multiplicative reasoning. And once we've got that done in what, three, four, five, six, seventh grade, then we need to move to proportional reasoning, which overlaps. That's starting in fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, really eighth grade proportional reasoning. But really that widest then, most overarching, at least where I stop. So I'm not suggesting there's not more, but where my work for K-12 teachers stops is functional reasoning. We really need to get kids reasoning functionally. And I don't just mean about the vertical line test. I mean functions, relations, graphs, tables, transformations. If we want kids reasoning about that functions, relations, graphs, tables, transformations at the high school level, that's built on and based on that proportional reasoning at the land of the middle school. And that's built on and based on multiplicative reasoning. That's built on and based on additive reasoning, which is built on and based on those counting strategies. But if we give kids, let me give you an example of an algorithm. Algorithms are amazing human achievements. They're amazing. They're just terrible teaching tools. We need algorithms for computers to follow. Algorithms also can express sort of general relationships, and that can be super helpful. But as a teaching tool, they fall very short. There are better ways to teach kids. Here's an example of that less sophisticated reasoning trap that I kind of pull out all the way through the book. If you were going to do a multiplication problem, then in those ovals, counting, additive, multiplicative, proportional, functional, you should be developing and using multiplicative reasoning if you're doing a multiplication problem. So I might ask kids something like 99 times 47. If a kid says, oh yeah, I know how to do that. I line these up and then I do a bunch of single digit multiplications. In each of those single digit multiplications, they could very well just do additive reasoning. They could very well just skip count to find those multiplication facts, do all that work, get a correct answer, and then they look now like they are a multiplicative reasoner. When in reality, every one of those single digit facts they were finding using skip counting, additive reasoning. That's reasoning in the level
Or
before,
just they memorize those single digit multiplication
which I
facts.
would say is even worse because now they're not even exercising their additive reasoning brain.
No, they're just pulling memorization. Yeah.
Yeah, and you might like golly, what were the songs that I grew up with on Saturday morning cartoons? 3, 6, 9, 12, 15,
Schoolhouse
18.
Rock.
There you go. So like if a kid's using that to find multiples, you might be like, oh, look, but that's like now they're singing. That's not mathematics. Now, Somebody listening might say, Pam, that's how I learned all these relationships and connections between the numbers. Well, I will grant that that's how you did it. Most people don't. That's why most people would say they're not a math person because they didn't naturally pick up on the relationships. The good news that I share with the math ed world is we now know how to develop those relationships. It's not enough to give kids a low dose of the relationships. We actually need to give them a high dose. Let me stay with that 99 times 47 quickly. You might be saying, my students or the way I teach it, my methods courses, I'm making sure that they're thinking multiplicatively about those single digit multiplication facts. So would I say 47 times 99? So if I'm doing 47 times 99, then that first one that I would do would be 9 times 7, 7 times 9. You might say, well, Pam, they're thinking about 9 times 7 as 10 times 7. And that's one too many sevens. So I'm going to back up. 1 7, that's 63. You might say, my kids are using multiplicative reasoning in all of those single digit multiplications. Well, I might grant you that. I might grant that you're encouraging that, you're trying to make that happen. Maybe your kids even are. But then if they're stuck in that long multiplication algorithm, what kind of reasoning what's the biggest set of numbers they'll ever reason multiplicatively about? I think it's single digit multiplication. Like, think of the algorithm. And then we wonder why kids' answers are completely unreasonable. I suggest it's because what we have, teachers and kids, we haven't given them experience in thinking about 99 47s. So I use this one on purpose because when I say 99 47s, everybody's eyebrows raise and go, 99, 100. Oh, I could think about 147s, but I only need 99 of them. Now we got to get rid of a 47. Well, now we're going to have to have some additive reasoning to do that subtraction, and I would want to build that. But my point here is we need kids reasoning about 99 47s. We need them thinking about 4,700 minus 47, not lining it up and doing a bunch of cross outies. We need them thinking that that's how we actually can develop place value, is that when kids actually have to reason, okay, I've got 4,700. What does it mean to then go 47 less than that? Where even am I? Oh, and now I'm having to think about thousands and partners of 100. And those are the relationships that we kind of leave out if we just plop kids in an algorithm, they get correct answers, we move on, and then we wonder why word problems are so hard. I submit that this framework that I've developed helps teachers think if I need kids to read a word problem that involves multiplicative reasoning, I need them reasoning multiplicatively to recognize it's multiplicative reasoning at all. Oh, now they don't have to pull from a set of algorithms we've taught them. Now they can just use what they know to continue to reason, to logic their way through the problem. And maybe the biggest point I would make here is those are the mental actions that mathematicians actually use. And we can get those going from the very beginning. Like little kids, we can help them use those mental actions.
Yeah, so I appreciate you laying out those the framework that you have because it does kind of structure the book as well. Like so the book it has these bigger ideas about mathematical reasoning and the trap of algorithms, but the book goes through those different stages with counting the additive, multiplicative, proportional, the functional. And in each chapter you talk about some of the traps specifically at that level, like how there's algorithms that play in all those places that can be the traps, and then providing some ideas about how to get out of those traps and how to try to promote the reasoning. So that structures the book. What are some other kinds of things that people would find in this book? What's the fodder that you sort of have? I don't want to give away too much. I want to hear it from you, like in terms of the examples that come, the illustrations, the math work. Like what kind of stuff would people find in there?
So one of the things that I hope people find really useful I that as I work with teachers, they seem to find this the most useful is we walk through some short lessons with students at all of those domains. What does it look like for high school students to reason functionally? What does it look like for first grade kids to reason with counting strategies and be building into additive reasoning and then everything in between? And so we've got little vignettes in there where we help you see, and I use problem strings because it's a nice sort of contained lesson structure. And you get to see the kids back and forth about the kinds of questions teachers are asking and the kinds of how they're creating discourse and around what. I invite everyone to consider that a lot of teachers right now have this idea that you gain some conceptual understanding and maybe you have some alternative, thinking and strategies, but really our outcome is for kids to mimic these steps of these algorithms. They also have the misconception that the algorithms are efficient. I'll just point you to our 99 times 47 if you want to trade efficiency right there. As teachers hear things like number talks, rich tasks, and let's get kids up at vertical surfaces. I'm not knocking any of that work, but I am suggesting it feels very unstructured. It feels very get some kids engaged, give them some, get them to understand a few things. But what we haven't done well, I think, as a math ed community is help teachers get really clear on what kinds of things do we actually want, what are the mental actions we want kids using. So I hope that giving the vignettes with then a QR code to go watch the video of the real thing happening will give everybody a vision of what it can look like to focus the instruction. It's not setting kids loose and saying, sure hope you discover math on your own, but it's also not telling kids what to do. I think there's this very nice sort of, I don't want to say in between because I don't know that's in between. There's this very nice way of helping teachers go, oh, like you had a point in that problem string and you were trying to get kids to do that strategy. And wow, it felt really organic, but you actually had planned where that was going to go. And by your questions, you got it to go that way. You nudged students in such a way that by the end of it, most of them were thinking about the particular relationships you had in mind. I'm suggesting that we need to actually help teachers be that deliberate and that focused. But the end isn't that they're good at algorithms. The end is that they're actually doing what mathy people actually do when they math.
Yeah, and the fun part, at least for me, is that that can also be kind of enjoyable to just look at some math from different grade levels and then to sort of realize, oh, that is kind of a nice little way to break it down. Or the at least for me, when you get to the mathematical reasoning stuff, it's sometimes kind of just fun to see the ideas at play, to see the structure being revealed and used. And so it makes the book kind of fun in that way, but it also can make the classroom fun when you are not just mimicking and seeing if everybody mimicked accurately. You can actually have a little bit of this fun of like, oh, insights, oh, a connection, oh, a structure. Like those are a little bit more fun in the classroom.
It's all the fun. That's what makes teaching meaningful is when you're really pulling on kids' actual thinking. Sometimes people will see me present a problem string, facilitate a problem string, and they'll say, like, do you really not understand what people are doing? You look so, and I'm like, wait, do I look confused or do I look intensely interested in how you're thinking about it?
Hmm.
And they're like, oh, you're not unsure of the answer. You actually care what I think about.
Hmm.
Yeah, like I'm intensely interested in what the participants in the workshop or the kids in the classroom, I'm intensely interested in how they're thinking because then I want to help nudge them to their next
Hmm.
level of sophistication of thinking, wherever they are.
So with this being, actually kind of fun and enjoyable, is there a favorite anecdote or a favorite vignette from the book that you could maybe just share as a little sample?
So it's not really an anecdote, but I would like to share this part of it. Part of the work that I have done over my years of professional development is really listening to teachers about how they intake research and how they intake different those NSF funded curricula. And as math ed has tried to help teachers teach differently, I'm very interested in how they hear the attempt. And part of what I've come out with is I think there's three ways that people sort of interpreted the nature of math and the nature of doing math when they were students that then can potentially distort the way that they teach math. So one of those ways was the way that I've already described that was me. That if as a kid you thought that to do math meant to rote memorize and mimic, then when you become a teacher, you might have the outcome I had, which was okay, if math is all about rote memorizing and mimicking this stuff that really isn't applicable to our lives and has no, meaning, but it's, we're going to do it because I'm good at it. So it's fun because I'm good at it. If that's the way that you approach teaching, then, and the way I did, then we're going to try to get kids engaged by making up stories and having songs, raps, rhymes. I'm going to help you memorize that with mnemonics and by telling, clever stories and getting kids sort of falsely engaged and then kind of trying to sneak the math in and kids would do it because they liked me, not because they were actually interested. So if you were like me as a student, it can then affect the way that you teach math. For those teachers, I got to give them a mathing experience. So if you ever come to a professional development that I do, or if you do any of my online workshops, which reminds me, I should mention the free online workshop that I have that university people can use in their methods classes if they're interested to do. In all of the PD experiences that I do, whether I'm working with kids or with teachers, I start with a mathing experience so that then we can have a common vocabulary. Otherwise, people are coming from the perspective they had as a kid, and we will then talk past each other. So I'll do a quick experience with them, maybe like I just did with the 99 times 47, 99. Can we think about 147s? Maybe even 99 plus 47. Can you think about that as 100 plus 47 and back up one? Can I get teachers really having an experience where I catch them and I go, wait, 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 wait. How did you just solve that problem? And they go, well, I just did this. And I'm like, well, why didn't you use the algorithm? And they're like, well, because I just felt like my intuition said this. And I was like, yes. And we can actually build your intuition and build your mathematical connection so that you can math that way. Now, if that's the definition of mathing, let's work on how we can do that with your students. So there's one distortion. Another distortion I'd like to bring out, maybe especially for the audience of this podcast, is if you were sort of naturally mathy, if for whatever reason you were like my kid, that as you walked around life and you hit the same low dose of mathematical patterns that we all run into, and that was a high enough dose for you that you pulled things together, you made mental connections, you used that then to logic through problems. Mathematics for you was a consistent, interconnected system that you could use logic and reason, and then that made your brain stronger and you started to do things more simultaneously. If that's always been natural for you, I invite you to consider that you might have the, I'm going to say, distorted view that it was because your teachers showed you the steps of an algorithm that you were able to do that. I'm actually going to invite you to consider that you could have gone further faster if someone was intentionally helping you create what you created on your own. I think you had to see through the steps. You had to make sense of it and then more. And you played with numbers. And for whatever reason, that low dose was enough for you. You had the inclination or the proclivity or the interest to dive in and do more with it. The good news is we now know what those things are, and we can deliberately help kids build those by giving them a high enough dose. Most kids, including me, need a higher dose of those relationships. So that's been my work really, is to decide what is that small set of major relationships that leads to a small set of major strategies. That if we focus on those things, now we got kids actually using the mental actions of mathing, and everyone will go farther if we teach math that way.
And math is figure outable instead of math is something to memorize or mimic. Yeah.
Instead of being rote memorizable, exactly that. Yeah. Do you have a favorite?
Well, like I said, it was definitely fun to be going through the examples. There was one that stood out. It was a pizza problem in the proportion chapter. I don't know if you remember this or not, but there was a pizza problem and it was talking about proportions and it was poking at the just remember the rule that you can multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same thing. So it's kind of this rule like, yep, if you multiply the numerator by 4, then you have to multiply the denominator by 4. The big idea here that you were getting at is that this scaling in tandem, you can actually think about it structurally as like you are slicing the parts, but you're going to slice all the parts, which means the numerator parts get sliced, but also the denominator, that you have twice as many or 4 times as many parts or whatever. So that was the context, but
Nice.
it was a pizza problem, and I know I got a big smile on my face because the figure that you and maybe it was one of your kids. Do you have some of the examples were from your children in
A
here?
few of them,
Or,
yeah.
yeah, the picture of this pizza problem was not a round pizza pie. It was actually still rectangles that showed the fraction, and then you split the fraction, scaling in tandem. And I was like, I like this style. The pizza doesn't have to actually be a drawing of a pizza. It can just represent the quantities of these fractions and how they're being sliced. And so that one, like, but there's a lot of little nuggets like this where there's these nice little math moments, math structure being revealed, some thinking being shared, and then giving some of these ideas for teachers about how you can make this part of your teaching.
I think one of the things that you're noticing is the difference between a model and a strategy, and then the deliberate use of particular models. I don't think it's an anything goes and you can use any model. I think there are some, well, you can, but I think there are some models that are more efficacious. They will work better if we use those models across time. Again, I think that's one of the things I bring looking at it from a K-12 perspective. What are models that have longevity? What are models that are better for building relationships, and a smaller set of those that are better for actually using for computation? One of the things I think that we miss in math ed today is that we have some good models out there that teachers have misunderstood, and they now use them for computation. I'll give you an example. Base 10 blocks. If I have kids do a lot of adding and subtracting with 3-digit numbers with base 10 materials, as they do that, they're doing a lot of counting by ones and very little additive reasoning. Again, counting is that inner oval. I want to build additive reasoning. If we're adding 3-digit numbers, I really want kids thinking and reasoning and place value. So there's work that we can do with base 10 materials to build the sense of size, but it's a terrible model to compute with. So that's another difference. Well, I actually pointed out more in the companion books
Mhm.
as
Yeah,
we
which
get
is
into. Is that a good segue?
exactly what I wanted to ask you about next, because so this book, Developing Mathematical Reasoning, it puts these ideas out at a K-12 sort of sense in a broader sense. But I know it's being followed up with books that are going to hone in on certain grade levels. So maybe talk a little bit about the K-12 span and also what's maybe coming next in this series.
Yeah, thanks for asking. So the K-12 book was meant to be an anchor book. A lot of people are using it right now as a book study because it's pretty unique that you have a book that actually has mathematics in it. It's not just pedagogy. It does have pedagogy, but it also has mathematics, where teachers can talk K-12 about this continuum and sort of where they fit and how it kind of leads in and builds on each other. It's in a big way that anchor book, Avoiding the Trap of Algorithms, is all about why algorithms is not should not be the end goal. Kids mimicking the steps of an algorithm should be the end goal of our K-12 math education, with some things to do. So peppered throughout the book are, so go try this and go look at that. Again, examples of those vignettes where we really walk through it happening in a real classroom. We can see kids actually using those mental actions. That's the K-12 anchor book. In a big way, it's a lot of like, let me convince you that algorithms are not the outcome. Then we're following it with 4 grade band specific books. So the K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, and each of those will be now what to do. If not algorithms, then what? That was almost going to be the subtitle was if not algorithms, then what? What is the then what? What are we doing in classrooms? I also talk about how teachers can manage if they are the grade that their standards call for a traditional algorithm, then how do you manage that? And just briefly, if I'm in 3rd grade, a lot of states have a 3rd grade standard where the students are supposed to use the addition algorithm to solve multi-digit numbers. Some states it's 4th grade. If you're in that state, whatever state you are, and that's your standard, 5th grade could be multiplication, then teach reasoning, not just fuzzy think better, but mathematical reasoning with that small set of major strategies. Teach that all year long. At the end of the year, it's your grade. You have to do it. It's in your standards. Then you say to kids, hey, all year long, we've been here listening to each other's strategies. We've been getting better at using relationships. Here's another strategy that maybe your parents learned. Some people might have learned this. Now, instead of what most teachers then hear is, oh, now I teach them the steps of the algorithms so they can do it. No, no, no. No, now do what I think most mathy people do, play with the algorithm. Like, why does it work? Show them the first step and go, why do you think they would do that? And kids will go, that's really weird. Why did they deal with the small numbers first? Ooh, that's strange. We always deal with the big numbers first because they matter more. Ooh, dealing with the small, that's odd. But then as you go through each of the steps, kids will actually have enough place value that they'll explain the algorithm better to you than the first year you taught it. Because they actually have been using relationships and connections, they're like, okay, I understand that. And here's what I think the goal is. At that point, I think the goal is for kids to go, huh, that's really cool that somebody made that up that has all those steps where the place value is kind of hidden behind the scenes. You can't, it's kind of opaque. It's not really transparent. You can't really tell what's going on. That's really cool. But why would anybody follow those steps if you can just reason through the problems?
Yeah.
Now, I'm actually quoting my kids. So my 4, they were the grand experiment. They never repeated steps of algorithms. They thought and reasoned. And to this day, if I ask them to do one of our traditional algorithms, they could maybe, they've seen it, but they don't ever use it. But literally, my son came home and he said, long division algorithm, that is intense. Wow, it's really cool. Super opaque. Can't really tell what's going on at all. Like place values embedded in there. Why would anybody do all those steps if you can just think through the numbers? To me, those are mathematical behaviors. And that's my goal, is to help all teachers realize that they can do that with their students.
Yeah. I want to broaden out just for a little bit here before we wrap up. But you've mentioned a couple times about a small set of big ideas in math. I wonder if you could maybe just comment on that a little bit, even beyond the book, but just why do you think it's productive for math ed or for math educators to think about a small set but of big ideas? And what do you mean by that? And why is that a helpful way to think about it?
For a long time, we've talked about not a mile wide and an inch deep, but we really want to. I don't know if you remember the NCTM focal points. That was a
Yep,
sort of
yep.
brief. I think it was a good idea.
Hmm.
But I would invite everybody to consider that when we've tried to do that, often it doesn't get translated well to teachers on the ground with students. And another case in point would be I really respect the Number Talk authors. There's several authors that have kind of put out their own versions of Number Talks, some of them better than others. as they've done that, I think the way the mathematics teaching community have read those is okay, so anything goes, and whatever kids do is cool. And I'm supposed to put all the different strategies on the board, and look how flexible we are. That's cool because I got 12 different ways to do the problem. And wow, we're super flexible. But really, or really, does the teacher not understand that they just put the same strategy on three different models?
Mhm.
And some strategies that really just derivations of each other, of kind of the big idea of how they use the numbers, and that actually there's no flexibility at all because what you've got is each kid doing their own thing and no impetus, no trigger to help the kids actually learn from each other. So can kids learn in that scenario? Yes, but very few. For most kids, it's not a high enough dose of a particular pattern. They saw it once among 12, kind of confusing things that are on the board because the teacher isn't clear enough to differentiate between models and strategies. And so they've just sort of thrown everything up, vomited what the kids said. It's not focused enough. So part of my work has been then what are the major strategies? If I'm going to throw algorithms out as the goal, then I need kids to be able to hit any problem that's reasonable to solve without a calculator and have power over it. That's part of the impetus to creating the small set that I've identified. I'd love for people's pushback. One of the things that I admire about Jenny Bay Williams and John San Giovanni in their numeracy sequence is I think kind of rarely they put out, here's what we think the major strategies are. I think that that's a little bit unique where they kind of honed in. We think these are the things that kids need to learn. Mine are a little different, but I think they dovetail well enough. But boy, when they came out with that, I was super interested to like, okay, if I missed something, is there, nope, okay, nope, we're good. We call a few things a little bit different. They lump some things together that I wouldn't. I think that's some current work that the math ed community could benefit from is if more of us thought deeply about what are the major, the small set. If algorithms aren't the goal, then what is it that kids need to learn so that they still have power over anything that's reasonable to solve without a calculator and a whole lot more?
Hmm. Are there any other key challenges that you see for our field? Since you're kind of this border crosser of curriculum and professional development and in schools, and you've had these experiences, do you see a key challenge that our field should be sort of tackling in the next few years?
I think one of the challenges, probably not the biggest one, but one of the challenges potentially could be, I think we can do a better job as math researchers to help the public understand the different kinds of research that's out there that is helpful, that it's not all what some people are calling the gold standard, where we have sort of a double blind.
Mhm. Randomized control trial, like,
Exactly. And why that's true. And that there are really good forms of research that we should be doing not only in gen ed, but we should be doing in special education. And I think Rachel Lambert has talked really well about the different kinds of research. And I think if more of us had, if we could talk about research well and help the public understand why we're using the research that we are to do the work that we are doing,
hmm.
then we might not fall into the trap of thinking that certain segments of research should speak louder than other really good bits of research.
Yeah,
That's one thing that I would encourage us to think about.
right. Yeah, that's interesting because I do think a lot of the public, they would just view research as declaring the winner, like what's the best curriculum, and research, quote unquote, would like tell us which curriculum is the winner. It's like, okay, well, that's not really what most of the research community is actually working on.
And I wonder if the research community could do a better job of helping frame what they do so that everybody was a little bit more clear on why we're choosing the research that we're choosing.
Hmm.
And then it could be a more subtle, nuanced conversation and less of a winner, not winner conversation.
Yeah, best, not best, like best on what metric and all that. Yeah, all that. Well, this has been a very enjoyable conversation. I've been speaking with Pam Harris. Her recent book is Developing Mathematical Reasoning from Corwin, and there's going to be some more coming out in that series. If you want to keep an eye out for the specific grade bands, there's one that's coming out like very soon, right?
It actually came out last week. So at the time of the recording, I got my copy last week. I'm holding it right here. Woo! That's the K2 book. So we're currently writing the 6.8. Everybody send good wishes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks for that. I do have one final question I want to ask, though. So you've obviously had a, very interesting math ed career, working in a lot of different spaces. But what if you weren't in math ed at all? Could you imagine any other kind of alternative career for yourself?
I could go two ways. I was actually, when I began teaching, I was a coach. So I'm an athlete. Really, really enjoyed playing basketball and volleyball, softball. and enjoyed coaching. I'll be honest, I was not a very good coach when I started. I tried way too much to be like my coaches. It took me some growing up to realize I needed to be myself, but I really enjoy that space. So that could be an alternative. That would be like an alternative if I wasn't in math ed, but a future when I'm not, maybe full time doing all math ed, then I'm going to serve a mission with my husband for a church. So
Well, thanks so much for taking time, and I enjoyed the book, so it's great talking to you about it.
thanks, Sam. It was a delight to be here.